So thank you, Dr. Young, for your letter of recommendation. It obviously convinced the board. Well, you all know that I am a Texan. I'm in my mother's living room or dining room right now. Have had the privilege of being with her during the pandemic. Born in Texas. Father is Jamaican, and so I have that Caribbean as well as Southern lineage running through my bloodline. Um, am ordained as an AME elder, pastored for 3 years before joining Hood and making that beautiful journey from Texas to North Carolina. But just happy to be where I am, who I am, and excited about this conversation because I think it's one that we need to really um, be okay with having. Sometimes family has to sit down and have some difficult conversations. We're still family, but we need to have a difficult conversation, and it's going to be all right because we love God and God loves us and we love each other. And so as long as love leads the way, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
All right. So, Sandra, you're leading the
Amen.
discussion. So, take it away, girl.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Grant, for saying yes. I was so relieved because she was a big part of my hood experience. She is a professor who is always willing to have the conversation. She is always on teach mode, okay, even at lunch, and she's just so easy to talk to. She opened up a whole new love in my heart for Jamaica, uh, because I know
And that's hard for Trinidadian. That's hard
no,
for Trinidadian.
no,
I'm
no,
messing
no,
with
no,
you. I'm
no,
messing with you.
no. But I think I didn't know how spiritual the people were
Mm.
until I took that class, that history of Christianity in the Caribbean. And man, oh man, was that an experience that I will never, ever forget. And so I wanted Dr. Grant to come on because she is an expert in history. She's an expert in um, history of Christianity, and I wanted her to talk about one of the things that has always bothered me about when I came here. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. When I came here as a child from Trinidad to the United States, coming from Trinidad, it was an island that very diverse. You had, blacks, whites, Chinese, Indians, and we didn't have this whole, well, I don't remember ever having to deal with discrimination and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of, you know, poking fun, at my accent, but I look like you, right? So I'm not, but then you think, oh, it's kids, so whatever. But growing up, and even now, I still see slithers of it, of what separates us, of people separating us because they think we're different than African Americans. And when Dr. Grant we talked about how we were going to present this, and she mentioned the distinctions and connections and how we honor both of them. And that's what I loved. That's what I took away, because that's what it is. We need to be able to do that, because I tell you, with my sister, she's always finding connections between African Americans and African Caribbeans, in our culture, how we do things, how we were raised, even in some of the foods that we ate, So, Dr. Grant, the floor is yours. Take it away, ladies. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have some questions, because like she said, it's a hard discussion that people don't have, but we want to have it, and we want to expose our audience, of and how we honor each other. We're different, but we still honor each other.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is really a gift. So let me just go back
Okay.
to how I got here. Okay. I
Mhm.
got here because I have a father who is a Jamaican, who was a Jamaican AME minister.
Hmm.
And he got a scholarship to come to the United States to go to school. At the time, the AME Church had a school in Jackson, Mississippi called Campbell College. So my father was raised Catholic. And when he converted to the AME Church, he converted to the AME Church because he read the discipline. And reading the story of Black struggle and Black self-help really was an eye-opening for him. He had an uncle who was a Garveyite, a Marcus Garveyite. So a Marcus Garveyite that was really concerned about, Africa for the Africans and uniting all of the diaspora. And so having been exposed to that uncle and reading that discipline really um, was compelling for him as a young teenager. So he left the Catholic Church. And my grandfather wanted him to become a priest because they had lost so many children before my father was born. He wanted to give them back to God, and my dad was like, "I'm not doing the celibacy thing," and so at any rate, he does accept the call to ministry in the AME Church. His gifts are recognized, and he comes to the United States, of all places, Jackson, Mississippi, in 1960. And he finds himself working with Medgar Evers and the NAACP as a young college student to help get the vote out. And so you can imagine Mississippi in 1960s NAACP. He immediately leaves from a place where he knows no racism to a
Mhm.
place where he sees where racism is at its hottest, right?
Yeah.
And so he aligns himself with the struggle. He leaves there. It's a 2-year program. He comes to Waco, Texas. Waco, Texas has Paul Quinn College, another AME school. He does his bachelor's there. He meets my mother. They meet, fall in love, get married, and my father becomes pastor of one of the lead churches, no, the lead church in the 10th district, which is Texas. And he immediately is hated on because they're trying to figure how this Jamaican man come over here and get the top church in the district. Well, my dad went straight to school. He went straight to school. He got the bachelor's of divinity, then when it got a master's. And so he went straight to school where a lot of African American men didn't really have the luxury or whatever to do that. But the fact is he did that. So we can see where he also gets a little bit of that jealousy, right? You're not one of us, but you're coming over here and you're getting, the top church. And that's just what, but I was qualified for it. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where these distinctions come from. The other piece that I just didn't really realize until recently when an uncle shared with me is that Waco, Texas, where I was born and my mother was born and grandmother was born, that's one of the places where you have the highest rates of lynching in the country.
Mm.
You look at McClellan County and East Texas, that's where a lot. And so my grandmother happened to be one of the persons that was forced to watch a lynching. And I never knew why she had such a violent stutter. I stutter, y'all know I stutter. So my uncle was like, well, yeah, we all stutter. That's part of the post-traumatic stress of the lynching that's passed down through generations, but I never knew that. So when you see what happens to families that are exposed to this kind of hostile terror, if you will, and it's not resolved, you have to try to find a way to make sense of what happens to these kinds of families. I'm saying that to say, when you have the civil rights movement that is successful in terms of getting the Civil Rights Amendment passed in 1964, getting the Voting Rights passed in 1965, and then having that Immigration Act in 1965 added to that, which allows for the first time Black immigrants to be able to come over to the country in numbers, that hadn't, previously most of the immigrants that were allowed to come in were all European immigrants. You had to really have a special sponsor, like my dad did in 1960, to be able to come over. After 1965, the doors opened, and now we have lots of immigrants from the continent of Africa, from the Caribbean, all eager to come and take advantage of the opportunities in the United States. So the problem comes in now is when you realize that this country has failed at every turn to allow African Americans the same opportunity to gain economic access. Because that's what America is about, business, and that's it. When you look at the way the country is started, it started with either crown charters or corporation charters. Why? Because they want to make money. Europe is broke and they need to make money. So this whole enterprise starts because Europe needs to make money. So when folks come here, you come in with a plan. How am I going to get here? Either I'm going to get a career, I'm going to go to school, or I have an idea, I'm going to start a business. But African Americans, the only time we had that was after Reconstruction. And then when that fails, when they pull out all of the troops and we're exposed to all of these Confederate people who are mad because they lost, that's when you have all of the towns that we have destroyed. We built towns, we built businesses, we built schools. And then if you can look at what happened over the last 50 years, from 1968 to now, we continue to lose ground. And so you have to ask yourself, why are we losing ground? Are we inferior? What has happened even in the last, from the 1980s, from the Reagan era to now? You can see how all the civil rights movement that we work so hard for, how they're rolling those things back, right? Even right now, they're still trying to take away the vote. Why? We take away the vote, then we can take away access to putting people in office that can actually advocate for the things that we need. So the tension comes in, and I'll just give you a very personal example. My father, when he came over on a scholarship, once he was established, he arranged for his sisters, my aunts, to come over. He arranged for his brother to come over, and they're all coming over after the civil rights movement, right? And the beautiful thing about the Caribbean is that we are able to establish communities of support. And a lot of times this support is because we're used to always having to make do. My grandparents in Jamaica had crippling poverty. I mean, my grandfather was a tailor. My mother stayed at home. When my mom took me over there for, as a little girl, they had a dirt floor. That's how poor they were. I mean, my dad sent money, but at the time, and I asked for a second piece of chicken because I'm used to coming from the South. Well, we eat.
Yeah.
And over in Jamaica, you'll take one chicken and you'll chop it up in so many pieces, and you get a lot of rice and a lot of gravy, and that's it. Well, I asked for another piece of chicken because I'm like, okay, y'all gave me this half of a chicken leg. Y'all cut a chicken leg in 3 pieces. I'm asking, so mom was like, hold on now, let's give you some more rice and gravy and get you full. So there's a distinction between coming from crippling poverty and being ready to take advantage of the opportunities that the United States offers, right, as an immigrant. So my other cousins that came over afterwards, they're like, listen, we're just here for the opportunities. We're not really trying to hang out with African Americans and hearing all their complaints, and we're gonna hang out with our Caribbean people or our other folk, because we're not trying to have this victim mentality. We're not trying to have that. But they don't really understand the extent of the victimization. And I think that's because we don't talk to each other enough. We don't see each other enough, and we deal with stereotypes, right? Um, so when my cousin comes over and says, listen, I would never date an African American man. I'm like, but this African American man that, like King, that got you over here. You wouldn't be here without African American men. So I just think it's a talking past one another. It's not hearing each other. And I think we're at the point now where we just need to kind of sit down and say, listen, this is who I am. And I think that people like me who are able to see both sides of it, because I live and I love on both sides, it's critically important that my Caribbean sisters and brothers understand that we're not victims. We have been plundered, basically. We've been plundered, and every time the country could do right by us, they haven't. And we're worse now because what we did used to have our families, we did used to have our churches, we did used to have our schools, we used to have a strong sense of community, we used to have our music. Well, the music industries, ever since the crack epidemic, has even poisoned the well of our culture, to where at least we had music that would support our love for each other. Now the music seems to intensify the commodification of one another. So the problem with culture, that culture is porous, and African American culture is marketed throughout the world. And so if we are singing and rapping poison, then other cultures are going to be mimicking us and singing and rapping poison. So it behooves really all of us to kind of get past whatever we see as nuances, or not maybe nuances, but real stumbling blocks to communication, to hear each other, to see each other, and see what we can do in terms of joining our forces. I might not ever be able to agree wholeheartedly, but if I can find some place, like we know we can all agree on police reform, we can all agree on that. We might not all agree on reparations, but we can agree on that. Maybe we can agree on some other kinds of things. But I think it's important for us to really, because what I see this is, I see this as a reckoning with the way the modern world was created. And the modern world was created when Europe begins to impose its will on the rest of the world, right? The rising of Europe really occurs when Portugal and Spain begin to colonize the New World, and Britain gets in on it, and the rest of Europe get in on it, and so that imposition of European culture and European militarism, European science, all of that creates what we know as the New World, the European philosophy. But in that, we have some complicity with West Africa, right? So West Africa, if y'all recall, when Nikki Giovanni came and spoke to Hood, one of the first things she said was West Africa owes us an apology. And I think right now only a few countries have acknowledged their role in the transatlantic slave trade. So we were not always, we've never really been a cohesive group in terms of blackness and whiteness. We've always been Igbo. We've always been Ashanti. We've always been, we became black when it benefited folk to become white, because they weren't white either. They were Irish, they were German, they were French, they were English, they were a lot of things. But then when it benefited them to become white, somebody had to be black. So there've always been distinctions, there've always been connections, but the fact is that we are Christians. If we're Christians now, we have to look at all of these things through the lens of what we believe Christianity does when somebody is born again, right, by the Spirit. What happens when we're born again? Supposedly there's no more black, no more white, no more rich, no more poor, no more male, no more female, supposedly. So if we have that kind of egalitarianism, And if we have what we call that love ethic, okay, I want you to love now. I want y'all to know you Christians by how you love for each other. And then King was say, okay, well, love without justice is anemic.
Mhm.
And then justice without love is tyrannical. So so what does all this mean? What does love and justice, how does that come into play? When we're really trying to, I think, see one another and hear one another. And so I think that the Black church, which is really having to deal with a lot of things right now, post COVID, or really almost post COVID. I think this is the next big thing, because all of our churches, AME, Zion, even Baptist, we're all throughout the diaspora.
Mhm.
All of us. You know, we've all established churches outside of wherever the headquarters is, Charlotte or Philadelphia. We've all got churches all over the world with people that talk in different accents. And so how do we deal with what we see as the splintering? And I think that we deal with it by just having these kinds of coffee table conversations. What is it that you want? What do you want from your country? What do you want from your church? And so I think that we are at a place in this country right now where, if you look at how Black Christians came to the faith, we came to the faith because we heard it through revivalists. Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, that said you have to be born again, told us about sin. We started reading the Bible. We saw the Exodus story. We could relate to that because we were enslaved. Wow, most folk go to Christianity to express some kind of sense of being free from oppression. So we loved that. And then somebody started counting the years. Okay, well, from, if you look at the time when Portuguese started enslaving folk, you got to look at the 15th century. At the time the English did, or Britain did, you got to look at the 17th century. So 1619 in Virginia to 2019, folks starting to count. Okay, look, Lord, if this Bible gives a clock that after 400 years the Israelites were free from their oppressor, we are still here in the country where we've been oppressed. We have the right. We have the right as citizens. If we're citizens, we got First Amendment right, the right to protest, the right to assemble peaceably. We have the right to worship God. So folks said we have the right to put demands on this country who has harmed us so terribly. So you're starting to see pressure now that wasn't there, because folk are saying, listen, it's been 400 years and we're looking that we've only gotten more oppressed, and the oppression has gotten more nuanced, because we've lost the institutions that gave us a cohesiveness. So I think that that's what we're starting to see, that African Americans in some extent are starting to say, listen, I'm very, very concerned about my children. Whenever you hear Stevie Wonder say, I got to move to Ghana, so that my children and my grandchildren won't face oppression. And Stevie Wonder arguably has had a privileged life here. To me, we have to have a conversation about what is Stevie Wonder, what is he experiencing. So that's just a little bit. I don't want to take up too much time, because I already see it's already 7:04. But that's just kind of what I've shared from how I've been able to see through my lens of both having Caribbean lineage and African American Texan lineage. What are your thoughts about what you've heard?
Dr. Grant, you said something that really, really stuck out to me. You talked about your grandmother who had a terrible stutter because she was forced to watch a lynching.
Yes.
and how that trauma becomes
Yes.
a part of our DNA.
Yes.
And I don't think that we even think about that. But to hear you say that and to hear you tell that personal story that your grandmother had to watch, was forced to watch a lynching, and she had a terrible stutter, and then the generations after her stutter. So that tells you what oppression does, what violence and hate and anger does to a person who simply has to witness it. Now, how much more does it affect the person who's actually experiencing it right within their family? If that's my father, if that's my uncle, if that's my cousin, brother, and we have these experiences that we really have not been allowed to talk about. And I think that's a lot of it, because when we begin to talk about them, whether it's privately or publicly, there's always somebody who says we need to let that go. But ain't nobody letting them Confederate flags go. I'm just saying. So how can we convey the depth of that to not only to people who are on the outside of our diaspora, but to the younger ones who are a part of us? How can we help them to see when they are impatient with the old heads because of some of the things that they say and do? How can we help people to understand that?
You know, I think just, things as simple as, and I know it's really hard because folks are so busy, but the one thing that the pandemic did for those of us that had families, where we could sit down and share meals together and just talk to one another. Now, I mean, I know some, that gets old after a while, but I think that my grandmother never shared that with me. I never knew. She kept that. Because that was terror. Folks don't normally talk about things. Plus, that generation held a lot of stuff. Just because if I start talking about it, I might not be able to come out of it, right? So let me just put that away until, and just go about my daily routines, feeding my children, taking care of my husband, cleaning Miss Jane's house, and going on and expressing it, maybe shouting in church or whatever. But the fact is, it takes its toll on you, right? It takes its toll on you. So, but I think telling the stories as we know them are extremely important. I had no idea how important the men's roles were in World War II in the civil rights movement until I was asked to put together a program. And I had an uncle, and I asked him about it. I didn't know, I'm a kid. He couldn't talk about it. And I realized just how the men were mistreated uh, in World War II. The things I mean, the humiliation that they had to go through, serving this country, and yet the people that they're serving are violating them more than the people that they're trying to, to fight. I mean, just degradation after degradation, humiliation on top of humiliation. But I think that what's pivotal for understanding is that most people, once they have a liberation struggle, you don't really remain in the same place where you're struggling. Normally you move. And I think that for Black folk, because every time we've managed to have some gains, because we still are staying in the same place where the oppression and the pain takes place, it's very, very difficult. Because the minute that you have a law on the books to kind of ameliorate your suffering, they're planning how we can unravel this um, uh, the same night. You hear about the night that Barack Obama is elected, and they're meeting the same night to try to say, how can we make him a one-term president? So it's other than Brazil, there's probably the only place where you see a large body of African Americans that are still the minority, in a place where you have a lot of white supremacists governing bodies that are making the law. So it's a very interesting case.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
That the question that you asked Deirdre about the trauma, that's, we're actually working on something uh, that has to do with secondary traumatic stress, right? How it's related to compassion fatigue, and so there it is right there. You didn't have to witness the hanging yourself, you understand? But in that, hearing the story of it can still produce that stress in you, they're so bringing the understanding of how the stuttering passes on to generation. They didn't have to be there. They didn't have to witness that hanging themselves, right? But they're still affected by it, in a secondary sense.
yeah, I mean, there's some wonderful. I mean, we are so blessed now to have so many scholars that are doing this kind of work. I know Joy DeGride was the first person to come up with post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yes.
And so her work and her students have taken it and done a lot of work with it. And there was a young lady that I think she's at Columbia in Atlanta. She is doing some work as well on that. I'll have to get her name. But we got a lot of folks that are working on it in terms of theory and scholarship that can help us, work through this. I mean, I think that part of the repair that has to be done is lineage therapy. I mean, it's dealing with the trauma that you have experienced coming out of Jim Crow, coming out of enslavement, coming out of colonialism, coming out of all of that. We all have some. If you're black in the new world to some extent, you do have some level of trauma. Some might not be as intense as others, but it is there. But I think that that's really where the distinction is. The distinction is that African Americans have never ever gotten a chance to have with one time right after the Civil War, from about 1866 to 1877, we had a run. And what did we do? We ran hard, we ran strong. We got all the way to the U.S. Senate. We ran so strong, and they said never again. But the devil is a lie, and God has the final say. But I think that's those are the kinds of things that many of my Caribbean brothers and sisters, they don't really want to deal with that, because they say, listen, you've got the same 24 hours in a day as we have, and you can go to school, you can study, you can raise your children, you can, but if you are suffering from a lineage traumatic situation that has kind of crippled you, if you have had your land stolen, if you have had your husband locked up, if you have had the war on drugs has turned your neighborhood into a crime zone, all kinds of things, just being broke, and you have one setback, it might take you years, and I know a lot of us might take you years to get over that. But I think that just having a conversation about what we don't know about one another matters. But I will say the one thing that we have to work on as African Americans, we're going to have to build our communal relationships that have been so undermined over the last 40, 50 years. That's one thing that I can say, my Jamaicans, my Trinidadians, my Haitians, They know how to find each other, that they know how to help each other, that they know how to hook each other up. You know, you know, you need a plumber, you need this, you need a job, you know how, I mean, even just as simple as, I don't know if y'all play partner in Trinidad, but Jamaicans, okay, they knew a long time ago, we can't go to a loan. So we're gonna have to be our own economic bank.
We call it a susu.
Okay, Susu, everybody throwing $100 a month. And
Yes.
then, and so you go by birth month. December, you get the whole pot. So you got $12,000 or whatever it is. If you need to
Right.
buy a refrigerator, if you need to buy a car, if you need to buy a house, you know, you know, I'm gonna draw my partner. I'm gonna have a good piece of money, and I can work with it. And that's how you build economic strength. That way, we don't do that in the United States. We don't have the trust level, but we can build it. Especially, I mean, in the churches, y'all can do that. All that tribe money, 12, you know, tribe money.
12 tribes.
Hey, divide it up. You get an elder, the elder's part, and then you let the people, you know. But there's a lot of things that we need to do, creativity, you know, creatively to kind of build the economic sense of cooperation again, because competition is really used in the American culture to divide us. And so we're going to have to just become, you know, more loving. What does it mean? Love in action. What do you need? What do you need? How can we help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tonya, I
It's
see you.
interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. I see you were ready to jump in there. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tonya.
Now, I was just gonna say that it is so interesting. My uncle is actually from Trinidad. He married my aunt, and just, you know, the culture and everything, and, you know, him showing a lot of us is coming up as a kid, you know, they were helpful, very, very much a part of my upbringing, but, you know, that was always something of interest to me. But one of the things that you just mentioned, which kind of highlights a lot, is even with the concept of the susu. I mean, it's like, you know, when you're coming from that culture and the fact of understanding, we can't go to the traditional means. We've got to come together, and how y'all were able, you know, how they were able to come together to do that. But you try that here in the States, and that's something now that has become quote unquote popular, and that people are trying to do. But when they try that, you've got people that come in saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this, but they have ulterior motives. They don't understand really the whole concept of it. What they see is dollar signs, and they see me. They see, you know, what's best for me. And so because of the African Americans mindset, though it's just, you know, funny how we may come out of one region or one area, but because we have been divided for so long, our view, though we are a part of you, our view is totally distorted now, and we don't understand.
But understand, it wasn't always that way. That's how when we came out of Reconstruction, we were together. We had to go find our people that were sold away. We found, if we couldn't find them, we just made a new family. We had play aunties and play mamas and play daddies. And that's how we did it. If you had a chicken and I had a pig, we all ate. You know, so we had that same mentality. What happened? What happened? Well, first of all, we had to migrate out of the South. Once you leave the land and go to the city, your whole way of understanding cooperation changes, because the cities now are where we went to. We went to the factories, to the government jobs, but we're away from the land now. We're away from the land. So once you're away from the land, your mentality changes, I think, to a large extent. And then urban life is jungle life. Urban life is dog eat dog now.
Dog eat dog, yeah.
Rather than cooperation, now it's competition.
I think that word competition is just when Tonya was talking, I was thinking about how we, because we are in this country and are of this country, whether it wants to believe that or not, we still have that up by the bootstrap thing. But it's really cruel to teach a person to pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they don't have any boots.
Absolutely.
I think that's where we get so, and we have these commercials, and they are teaching us planned obsolescence. You know, they are telling us that we must have this in order to be successful, and we must live like this. That's why so many of us have been stuck perming our hair for so many years, because your hair has to be straight, and it can't go back when you sweat if you want to get that job, you know, all of that stuff. And we African Americans bear that, as well as the oppression from outside of us, you know, as well as the history of the trauma that has continued. And then we got seeing Black men, women shot, left on the street to bleed out. That's not unintentional. That's not an accident that they shoot them and leave them to bleed out on the street. That's just like making somebody watch a lynching. It's the same thing. And it's the trauma is over and over and over and over. And it makes it so difficult for us to even see the possibilities.
And yet we still see them. And we see them because somebody's preaching them on Sunday mornings. Somebody's teaching them on Wednesday nights.
Yes.
Somebody's singing them, kind of creating an atmosphere where the spirit can provide illumination and inspiration. We're still rising. It's just that we have, it's like every time we rise, we get lower the floor.
Yeah.
And that's just because of policies and programs, right? But I don't know if I've been helpful at all, Pastor Carter, just in terms of sharing the pieces. I took more time than I wanted to, but
no, that's fine. You actually absolutely were helpful. I hope the ladies enjoyed you. As far as us, figuring out the connections that we have one with another, it's not that far off. It's just like you said, it's gotten watered down, but really, like you said, when they lived close to the land, we were so similar as far as our, I tell my parishioners and my members, the village mentality. We had that village mentality once upon a time, and they had it here too once upon a time.
Yeah.
So there, I see the connection, and I hope that they can see the connection. We're not that different. You know what I mean? Time has come on, and history and incidents have come that have changed us, but we are still connected. We are still connected. And I want to thank you, Dr. Grant. I could listen to you for hours. You have so much information to share.
Yeah.
And your viewpoints are absolutely enlightening to me. She's one of the reasons why I miss Hood. I don't know how Hood manages to get the creme de la creme to teach at that institution. It's very, but they do. And so I thank you. And hopefully we can have you back again sometime in the future.
Listen, I'm just so happy. Y'all just don't know, just to be able to see Reverend Deirdre and Reverend Tonya and Reverend Sandra. Oh my goodness, it's just so good to see y'all.
Yeah, now, Dr. Grant, you cannot go without talking a little bit about hip hop, because I know you a hip hop head.
I love hip hop. And I have to say that I haven't been keeping up with it since it became, what do they call it? Whatever my little nephew listens to, all the littles. It seems like all the
mumble
rappers
and
that I
churn.
got little and mumble rap and
Mumble
all
and
of that.
churn,
I
yeah.
haven't. It look like they all talk about popping pills, and I can't get with that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's really just the art of the spoken word taken to the next level in terms of a lyrical presentation to tell a story, to entertain,
Mhm.
to get the party started.
Yes.
The way in which Africa continues to live
Yes.
in the psyche
Yes.
and the soul of African folk throughout the diaspora.
Yeah.
You can look at how folk have taken hip hop, just like they've taken R&B, just like they've taken not necessarily the blues, but reggae and soca to some degree, and made it their own, right? So I mean, we are communicating to one another. We're communicating to God all the joys, all the pains, all the ups, all the downs of life, and sometimes doing it in a very hardcore, in your face, gritty, profane, sacrilegious kind of a way, because of the conditions that we live in are profane and are an affront to the Creator, who intends for all of life to have what it needs to not just survive but to thrive.
Thrive.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So hip hop is absolutely sacred. We're gonna have to have another hip hop service and bring you back in.
That was amazing. You have the distinction of orchestrating the first hip hop service at Hood Theological Seminary, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think
Wasn't that the
second
first
one.
one?
Yeah,
There
I had
hasn't
the
been a
first
second
one
one?
when I was a seminarian at Perkins too. And guess who I had? I had, before Lecrae was Lecrae.
Oh,
Lecrae
wow.
came to Perkins.
Wow.
Yep. So we're gonna have to bring Lecrae to Hood. Y'all gonna have to pray to let me get Lecrae to come to Hood, see if he can remember, because I think he's just in Atlanta. He's not far.
Yeah, and she did the first immersion class to Jamaica at Hood, and wow, that was a success.
That was fun. That was scary. They were gonna stone me, Deidre. Sandra was gonna stone me.
I'm just so disappointed that COVID took my opportunity to go to Ghana.
Well, we're gonna have to wait and see. We're gonna
that.
have to wait and see what the Lord has to say in the future. But
yeah,
it's we're not through it yet, but I think we're on the downside of it.
Yeah, I think we're on the backside.
Yeah.
All right, ladies. Well, we try to honor your time, because everybody's busy, everybody's got things to do, sermons to prepare, and all of that stuff. But I really want to, again, as Sandra said, thank you, Dr. Grant, for agreeing to come and speak with us, because I know that I've been enriched just by sitting in your classes, and certainly listening to you tonight